So I had this dream last night where I was finding comfort and solace in visiting strangers' funeral services, just sitting there in silence, observing people mourn for their loved ones. I sat there and it felt nice because I was unknown and invisible. I was unknown and invisible. And so that was a strange dream I had last night. And I was just visiting different people's strangers that I've never met. And I was just going to their funeral services filled with, just kind of your traditional funeral service, open casket. And it was weird that it felt good. Not because the person had passed away, but I felt a weird sense of, it's hard to even put it into context, but I felt, it felt good knowing that none of these people knew who I was. And I was there at a funeral service, just observing people mourn for their loved ones. And the weirdest, I guess, because I felt like almost like an outside entity, or almost like if I wasn't human. I was. It felt good in the dream state, and while my inner id was conversing amongst itself while having this dream, I felt good in knowing that people didn't know whether I was a cousin, or people didn't know if I was a high school friend. People didn't know if I was a coworker. People didn't know if I was, um, whatever. For whatever reason, I felt like solace and comfort in that. That I was pretty much just, I was like, it was like I was an alien. I was like an invisible alien and no one knew who I was. Yet I was sitting there, and I went to more than one funeral service in this one dream. And somewhere along one of the services, I started having a philosophical debate in my head while I'm just sitting there, you know, silent, not saying anything. I'm just observing everybody's body language. And I started having a philosophical debate in my head because there was some children in the funeral too. And every now and then parents would like kind of have to be like, shut up. Like, so they were telling their kids to behave and shut up and, be respectful. You're at a funeral service, things of that nature. And I started having a philosophical debate in my head in the dream while I'm sitting there. And I'm like, should children be allowed in funeral services? Or like, what's the appropriate age? Is it, can it damage a kid? Can it be, can negative things stem from exposing a 4-year-old or a 5-year-old to a funeral service? And I know that, kids, they all kind of grow and mature at their own rate. It's not like, oh, every 6-year-old should never be allowed into a funeral service. You know, it's not like you can just slap a number on it and be like, if you're 7, you're not allowed into a funeral home. But if you're 8, then you're allowed into a funeral home. You know, because there could be a 7-year-old who's more mature than an 8-year-old. Just because you're a year older doesn't mean you're a year smarter, so to speak. But yeah, I just found that interesting. Like, after like the 3rd funeral service that I went to, full of strangers, people that I never knew. Um, the people laying, you know, in the open caskets. I mean, I didn't know who they were. I had never met them. Yet somewhere along the line, I just started having that philosophical debate, and I was like, should kids even be allowed into like a funeral service? Can it be psychologically traumatizing to certain kids? And there's really no way to know. Maybe a funeral service has traumatized kids in the past. Is there really a reason to have 4 or 5-year-olds sitting down in a funeral service for 3, 4, or 5 hours? Sometimes funeral services last longer than one day. To expose a 4 or 5-year-old to a funeral service for say 3 days in a row, like, can that be traumatizing? I don't know. I'm not going on this fucking rant of like, if you do, you're a monster. You know, it's not even about that. It's just a strange dream. And even stranger that the whole time I was there, never really said a word. Not that I remember him. I don't remember every fine last detail of that dream that I had last night. But I don't think I remember hearing myself really say anything. Uh, but yeah, it was just even weirder that I just had a sense of, I don't know. I found it comforting and soothing, like the way one does when you hear, you know, symphony by Beethoven, or just seeing the moonrise, or hearing the water crash, you know, just hearing the waterfall and hearing the water crash into the rocks. And sometimes I could just find it soothing or relaxing. And it was just weird that the fact that I was amongst strangers would never see me and I'd never seen them. Yet I was a part of the gathering. It filled me with a sense of solace. I just thought that was kind of strange.